We're almost there. Our design is looking good on our desktop, but we need to make sure it works well at other browser sizes. Through media queries, we'll focus in on how to make our design and typography bulletproof no matter what size screen you're on. I didn't want for us to responsively design each section as we went, as we'll first want to make major adjustments with our body font size at different sizes. This will adjust every piece of text at that size. Then we'll want to go and adjust our typography as needed after that happens. We'll start by beginning to drag our browser inward. One of the things we want to pay closest attention to here is our measure, as it will determine when to make responsive breakpoints. As I drag the browser inward, at about 1024 pixels, we're noticing our columns are getting somewhat tight around this browser size. So I want to go into our CSS, and with our media query here with a max width of 64M or 1024 pixels, we'll adjust the body font size to be 1.125M or 16 pixels. Let's save and see how that looks now. Great. So our column measure is looking a lot better here, but a few things have also changed in the design. We see now our measure for our one columns need adjusting, and our summary class could use a bit of balance up here. So I'll go into our CSS, and for our summary, I'll set a max width of 40 rem, as that'll balance it out. And then I'll set a max width for all our columns, H3s, and Ps to be 27.5 rem. So let's check out the change. Great. Our summary here is much more balanced, with this sentence coming first and then the following sentence coming on the next line. And then our measure down here for our columns is much more comfortable. All right, so as I drag the window in again, at around the 864 pixel mark, we could use another decrease in font size because our column measure is getting tight again. This will also help our H1 to not break into another line. So in our CSS, with a max width of 54M or 864 pixels, we'll begin to implement some changes. I'm going to change our body font size down to 1M or 16 pixels, and then I'm going to adjust the max width of our summary to keep it in balance. Let's go look at that now. Cool. So our text has shrunken as a whole because our body font size has changed, and our summary is still balanced, and it still looks like we have a nice measure for our columns here. As I continue to scale it downwards, we notice at the 752 pixel mark, our header is breaking to the next line. Since we only have access to CSS, we cannot implement something like FitText.js, which automatically sizes our titles based on our browser size. Also, we wouldn't want to implement the viewport width unit of measure in CSS because it's not super reliable across different browsers. So we'll want to manually adjust our header at this breakpoint. I'll head over to our CSS, and with our media query of max width 47M, which is relative to 752 pixels, we'll change our header to have a font size of 4.5M. And our H2 to 1.333M, which is our next size down in our scale. Let's check out what that's looking like now. Nice, much better. It keeps our proportions intact there. But notice now down here, our columns are really tight, so this seems like a good point to switch our 2-column layout into a 1-column layout. To do that, I'll simply set our explanation and participation classes, which are our 2 columns, to have a width of 100%, so now they span across the browser, and readjust the padding to be 4M and 6% to match the padding of our other sections at this size. Let's check out how that looks. Great. This keeps the content flow fairly simple and clear for smaller sizes. I'm going to go in and remove these asterisks as they're no longer needed. I'm also going to remove where we commented out our basehole.it as it's no longer necessary, and this will bring our HTML back to its original state. We'll save that and then check out how it's looking. So I'll refresh it one more time, and now our asterisks are gone, and we'll begin to drag in our browser, and it's looking good here. And then finally at about 544 pixels, we're seeing a break happen there. So I'm going to want to go in and set one more max width media query for these small sizes. So with our media query at 34M or 544 pixels, we want to start to change some things. I don't want to change our overall body font size as I don't want it to be less than 16 pixels, so we'll go in and change sizes individually as needed. For our header, I'll first give it a padding of 6M and 4%. This change to the top and bottom padding will remove some of the white space that's a bit much at this small of a size. We'll also want to change our header H1 to a font size of 2.6M, so it's a bit smaller, and a line height of 0.8, just in case it breaks to 2 lines on extra small screens. We'll then set our H2 to a font size of 1M to keep it smaller than our main title, and we'll adjust our letter spacing to 0.2M as it was a bit too long with wider letter spacing. Lastly, we'll give it just a bit of space from our H1 by adding some top margin of 0.3M. Let's save and check that out. Great. So the size of our main title and tagline feel a lot more appropriate for smaller size screens. Our summary and H3s now feel a bit big, so let's go in and fix those. I'll start by targeting our summary class paragraphs and setting them at a font size of 1M, a line height of 1.6, and a max width of 27.5 rem to keep it balanced. This is utilizing similar values that we're using for our columns. I'll then set my summary P plus P to be just a bit smaller with a font size of 0.9M. Finally, I want my H3s to be a step down in our scale, so we'll go for 1.333M. Good, so the content feels much more reasonable for these smaller sizes, but it still retains the overall hierarchy and flow. Lastly, let's look at our side content at the bottom. At this media query, it'll be smart to break them into one column as the two are closing in on one another's space. So what we want to happen is the right column will fall under the left and everything will remain centered. To do that, let's head over to our CSS and style it out. We'll do this in our CSS by targeting our design selection class and giving it a width of 100%, so it'll now take up the full browser width. And then we'll remove the border right by setting it to none as it's no longer needed, and I'll set the padding to 0 for the top and bottom, and 3% for the left and right just to retain some amount of space there. Instead of that border on the right side, I would like to implement a bottom border here in the same style to split this section from the one below it. So I'll target our design selection class, li, last of type, so that's the last link in our list, and give it a bottom border 1 pixel solid with the same blue we were using and a padding bottom of 3M to give it some space. Now for our design archives class, I'll give it some top padding of the same amount and then set the width to 100%. And finally, I'll set the width of our Zen resources class to also be 100%. Let's save and now check this out. Great. The break happens just in time before our columns close in on one another, and our vertical spacing here looks good. The bottom border also really helps separate these two sections. As the browser continues to close in, our content still looks good. I also recommend testing this on the actual devices too to make sure your content is flowing well. Great. So we're set for our max width media queries. In the next video, we'll look into a few more polishing touches we can put on the design to bring it to a final state. To challenge yourself for extra credit, see if you can style out our aside content to behave like this for larger size screens. It was at the bottom of the page, and now we've moved it to working as a top drawer. In the beginning of the next video, I'll explain how it's accomplished.